What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Tim Lambesis of As I Lay Dying, Austrian Death Machine, and the new project Born Through Fire. Thank you for being here, man. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime, man. It's so awesome to have you here. The new Born Through Fire album is absolutely awesome. Was there sort of like a preconceived vision for what you wanted this new collaborative effort to sound like? Was it meant to sort of like combine elements of As I Lay Dying with Wolves at the Gate and The Word of Live in a way? Or was this meant to be kind of like new uncharted territory for all of you guys?
I think for me it was really just like writing music with a friend, and I'm friends. You know, Phil and I have been friends for 20 years, and it's not that I'm not friends with Phil from As I Lay Dying. It's just that the sole purpose of Born Through Fire originally was just to get together with one of my closest friends and work on songs and just see what comes about. You know, and naturally, I have tendencies that I've been writing riffs in the history of As I Lay Dying, and Joey's. A few years ago joined Wolves at the Gate. So naturally, we're going to kind of bring our elements to what we create, but we just we just wanted to like have no restrictions and do what felt natural to us.
Yeah. Yeah, what I found unique about it is because every song on this album, like, Blood, Fire, Pain, I felt like had a very different vibe from a track like The Reckoning, which had a sort of like a different vibe from Trapped Inside, and then The Well. Was there kind of like a specific formula that applied to the making of every song in a way, or was this like a very experimental songwriting process?
One of the things that Joey really brought to the table for me that it's new and I've since adapted and will incorporate into everything I do going forward is just he's a producer, has a very production minded approach, and so even though he's an incredible guitar player and all of our riffs originate on guitar, he thinks the big picture, like where's this going in a mix and the layers that are involved. So like Blood Fire Pain as an example, when we first were messing around with the riffs, I was like, oh, these riffs are cool, but they're very simple. And he goes, wait till you hear the production, the layers, and like where I'm going, it has this kind of like industrial kind of like dark feel to it, and that all really brings it to life in a different way. And so that kind of expanded my ability to view a song that way, as opposed to like focusing so much on how technical a riff is. And I was able to actually simplify some of my riffs on purpose, knowing Joey's production style.
Well, you mentioned, like a long friendship sort of like was sort of what led to the making of Born Through Fire. But like, was it almost like, was it either one of you like had an idea for this project and you were all seeking out specific musicians that best sort of fit this in a way? Or was it kind of like you all had a conversation and were like, oh, let's form a band?
I think for Joey and I, we always program our drums on our initial demo, and so like when it came to bringing in other guys, like it was like, okay, this is a really cool template for the song, but like I wonder what like Luke Holland would do, right? Because we watch a lot of his videos, and he's very creative with taking songs that say for instance, you take the song Joey and I don't even really like the song normally, right? But then he does a cover of it, and all of a sudden we like the song because of what he added to the drums, And so he's really able to. I mean, he does it with pop songs, right? So he takes these songs that I don't even think are really that exciting, and he somehow makes them incredibly exciting. So I figured, well, why don't we have him guest drum on some of our tracks, and then schedule-wise, that didn't line up for the entire album, but then we had our friend Parker do a few songs, and it just was that whole mindset of how do we feel like a band, even though the two of us are kind of the masterminds of this project.
And when it came to the two of you making this project, and this can technically apply to every band that you're in, but like, did both of you kind of have the same mutual vision in a way, or were you all kind of like trying to make different ideas sort of blend together in this way?
Usually the core of a song starts with either Joey or myself. So there's songs that Joey he wrote almost the entire instrumental, and then I came and said, hey, well, as I'm getting ready to put vocals on it, I want to redo the bridge, and maybe I'll add this riff or whatever. And there's other songs where I did the same. There's a really kind of a thrasher on the record, called Beneath the Scars, right? And I had written the three main riffs for that, and then just feel like, all right, Joey, here's like where I have this song as of right now. Where do you want to take it from here? Because I typically I tend to write up to the first or second chorus and then just like leave it empty, because it's like, well, I don't want to invest hours and hours writing a song if it doesn't really make the cut, And so for me, if once I get to that first chorus, and then I let Joey take his spin on it, and sometimes we wrote entire songs. There's probably like 10 songs we wrote where we were like, oh, this is cool, but it's just not album worthy, right? So Try
You
not to get too close to every song until we have that final touch.
yeah, you ever worried that the song you leave out will almost kind of like be a B side when it is, and just end up as like a number one single or something like that?
Well, I have I've done this with As I Dying. B sides have been like revisited years later, where it's like, hey, these the song wasn't great, but these two riffs were awesome. You know what I mean? And so I'll extract those two riffs and sort of like with fresh ears, like 5 years later, bring it back, and rewrite it. I've done that with an As I Dying song, and it's actually one of my favorite songs. Uh, it happens, I think, for a lot of projects.
Yeah, I think it's almost kind of like a curse in a way. I know a lot of musicians, like the songs that they hate the most end up being like their most successful ones or something like that.
Yeah, that happens. Especially with heavier bands, where they're like scared to add a certain degree of melody, and all of a sudden they add it, and then the fans love it. So
Yeah, and then they do too much melody, and then the fans hate it, and then new fans
yeah,
love it. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't in that regard.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's the whole premise behind Going Through Fire is like I want to enjoy the process, right? So if Joey and I spend a whole afternoon writing a song, and then the next day we listen to it and say, you know what, this isn't going to make the album, let's just throw it away. I don't mind because we enjoyed the process, right? So, whether a song is the biggest hit in the world or fans love it or hate it, I mean, right now, obviously, we get to make all the decisions on what the direction the band is. It's our first album, and I think fans to some degree have a little influence when bands have their third and fourth record because it's like there's a demand that's out there, right? But right now, we just kind of did what we wanted to do.
yeah. And you kind of led me into the next question, and I'm probably asking it very prematurely right now. But was this intended to just be kind of like a one-off thing, or is this going to be a project that you explore a lot more, make more albums, and even tour off on a regular basis?
No, I know that Joey and I will definitely keep writing music together. So there's no reason to not have a follow up. It's just probably a timing issue between we've got the Born Through Fire record out now. We'll let people sit with the songs enough till there's kind of like, okay, what would a live set list look like? That really wasn't a possibility until we had an album out, and then maybe do some special appearances and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm in the studio also with As I Dying now, and one of the things I think fans often misunderstand is that if a band's in the studio, that doesn't mean the record's coming out next week. It means like the record's coming out like almost a year because of the whole, you got to finish the recording and then the mixing and the artwork, and then it's got to get to distribution. So things keep me busy, and it's just once we figure out what the schedule is, we'll definitely have a follow up.
Yeah. Can you see yourself maybe doing like a full tour where it's like As I Lay Dying, Austrian Death Machine, Born Through Fire, or maybe like a Point of Recognition reunion as like an opening? Can you see yourself doing that?
I would be more than happy to play guitar before an As I Dying set, but I did it. I've done it a couple times for some festivals where I did an Austrian Death Machine. This is like more than 10 years ago, where I did an Austrian Death Machine set earlier in the day, and then As a Dying set, as a closer or one of the close to the very end of the night headlining bands. And I mean, I got through it, but I was exhausted, so I don't think it's very realistic to do two sets, especially with As a Dying sets. They've gotten longer as our career. We've got we're technically writing LP number 8 right now, so. Even if you only play 2 songs from every album, that's a very long set.
Yeah, I know, and I'd imagine that's one of the challenges that arise as you make more and more albums is putting a set list together.
Absolutely, yeah. People say, "Oh, why don't you play this? Why don't you play that song?" And it's like, well, every time we play like the really old deep cuts that somebody's really been asking for, a huge portion of the crowd just kind of stands there and looks at us like, what's this? We've never heard it, right? The people that have been asking for it, they're really, really stoked, but it's maybe 5% of the crowd. So it's just hard to figure out like what to do. So we'll try to once in a while bring out an old one, kind of keep that portion of the fan base really excited about the variables in our set. But for the most part, we try to go with the obvious choices, because the crowd interaction to me is as important as how well the band performs.
Of course, the crowd feeds off the band, and the band feeds off the crowd. And with everybody in the whole metalcore world having like the hardcore background in a way, you kind of like it's almost like without a crazy crowd, it's not a show like an As I Lay Dying show or any other band in the genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, and even my favorite venues, they're always the ones where the crowd has the ability to interact the most. So. I mean, speaking of growing up, going to hardcore shows or we're playing hardcore bands, it's like. One of the things that's weird is as you get into like I don't know, like I guess the modern era of metalcore, there's these barricades where the crowd sometimes is like 20 feet away, from the very front of the stage, and it's a totally different experience. Not personally my favorite. It's great when you want to have pyrotechnics and like do this big production. It's almost like you can just like sit in a chair and watch the band kind of thing, But in terms of just that sweaty intimacy, nothing beats that like that club where everybody's just kind of like just squished together.
Yeah, I mean, I love those crowds too, but I mean, at a Parkway Drive show, I don't, that's a law. That's almost kind of like a lawsuit waiting to happen if somebody jumps in front of the pyro or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll
So
enjoy watching that from the seats, but
yeah, for sure. And they took a different approach. I mean, they even musically separated, and it's less of it. It's more of like an arena metal kind of feel in the approach to songwriting that they took. So it's almost like they made their visuals and their music like line up for that purpose.
definitely. With the Born Through Fire album, one thing, maybe this could be me overthinking the whole thing completely, but being that the last album that we heard from you was shaped by fire, was this at all kind of like in a way like a sequel or like connected to it in a way?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the era that I was writing these songs, they were all written around the same time. And so the lyrical theme of like, really being refined through, the process of change and facing pain and hardship, to me was a really important theme for me to write about and talk about. And when I put together Shaped by Fire, that concept actually, specifically the words Shaped by Fire, I think more fit Born Through Fire, but with that particular song, I didn't want to leave off the As I Die record, and then interestingly enough, it then became the album title. You know what I mean? So, sometimes you just have a phrase that just perfectly fits a chorus, and I don't think this takes away from the art of it. I think this is just me being honest. I think some bands do this where they'll say, "Hey, what phrase best fits this chorus, regardless of the meaning of the song, right? Like here's the melody I have. It goes da da da. And it's like, okay, well, what are three syllables that just really powerfully represent that melody, And so when I was writing the As the Dying record, I was really Josh had presented me some melodies, and I said, okay, well, when I hear this melody, this is what comes to mind for me, And I was in the middle of writing these Born Through Fire songs, so naturally the fire theme, popped through.
You led me perfectly into this question that I wanted to ask you, actually, because for both Born Through Fire and As I Lay Dying, to me, one of the sounds that immediately comes to my mind is the bridge between the aggressive vocals and the clean vocals, whether it would be Josh's vocals. I believe Clint was doing the clean vocals before Josh in a way. But when it comes to, having those different vocals on a lyrical standpoint and on an emotional standpoint that's channeled in, do both of you kind of need to be in the same like emotional headspace when writing the vocals together and the lyrics in a way in order to make it sound like it fits? Or being that the vocal styles are so differently, you kind of need to bring different emotions to the different vocals?
It kind of depends on the era. So when Clint was in the band and the early portion of when Josh was in the band, I was writing the vocal melodies and then just saying, hey, this is what I feel fits the part. Can you just re-sing it, essentially, right? And I would even sometimes sing the demo version and then have them re-sing the final version. Of course, they sang it much better than I did because my voice is more of a baritone, so I'm a much lower voice. So for me to get in some of those ranges, I either have to like represent it with falsetto or just struggle to just really just push hard to hit the note.
I heard what you said. I heard what you said about baritone vocals on Garza's podcast, and as a typo negative fan, I'll admit, I just had to bring that up.
Oh yeah, I mean, type of negative. They're like a very rare exception, as an example, like because they have a whole mood created around the baritone thing, right? But yeah, it's very rare, and it is possible, but it's very rare. I mean, like Johnny Cash being a baritone, there's guys out there that do it, and they have this charm and character to it, but it's usually almost like I said, like a character, like a typo negative or Johnny Cash. It's like they almost have like their own. I don't know. It's like it's not replicable. Anyways, with that said, in those older records, I had written the melodies and they were just re-representing them. And then when Josh and I were working on Shaped by Fire, being a great example, and the two albums before that, he would come to me and say, "Hey, I really like this particular melody I have written. Do you think you could write around that?" And then I was then like sort of re-inspired because I had to take the feeling and the vibe of what Josh was I guess because he didn't have lyrics at the time, so he was just kind of humming melodies to me, and I say, okay, this really feels to me like this, and then I would actually uh, take a totally different approach to lyric writing. I wouldn't even write the song until I had those melodies in mind, and those melodies sort of represented a feeling to me. Um, and then to really fast forward to like current times, Ryan Neff, who's also in Miss May I, I've been in the studio with him a lot the last month, and it's been an incredible process working with him because, I mean, he's just so open-minded to trying anything. He'll try 10 different melodies on a song if that's what we need to do, right? And so this is the first time I think we've tried so many different melodies before we like solidified what the final melody is. And so that's even been a new process now, and I'm thankful for how that's expanded for
Yeah,
me.
and I like if there was anybody to come into the fold for As I Lay Dying, like Ryan was one of the first people that came to my mind. Somebody who sings melodies and plays bass. I think that's a really unique blend behind into it. But then there's also the lyrics. We went in onto the vocal technique, but then there's also the lyrical aspects behind it, which I always thought like your lyrics were very thought provoking. We speak of fighting to resist this world, but what about the battle within us? I think is a very relatable track. And then sometimes we have to watch our whole lives fall apart before we can live with them again. Do you need to hear the music before you come up with lyrics, or could a lyrical idea maybe help determine the actual sound in a way?
It's gone both ways. And first of all, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. It's gone both ways because, um, sometimes I'm just really, really looking for a song to fit this, like, have a paragraph or two of words I just feel like really invoke an emotion for me. And I'm like, oh, where can I fit these? And then other times, I'll hear a song and I'll immediately hear it and be like, that song makes me think of this. That's the theme. And then it's literally only like a few words, like a phrase, right? Blood, Fire, Pain being a great example. So uh, when Joey wrote the instrumental for it, I was like, man, like now that I hear all the layers and all the production, all the kind of the darker, like I mentioned before, these industrial type sounds in the background, it just reminds me of like a steel mill or an anvil, like a guy just like blood, fire, pain. That's what like the visual popped in my head, and I said, well, that's great because I wrote a story. I met somebody when I was incarcerated who had just really lived an extraordinarily difficult life, and I felt like, man, it's inspiring to me how he still keeps his head up through everything he's been through. So then we ended up writing the song about that, but it was like the sound of the song, that just those three words was just like what it sounded like to me.
I know that you've had to confront a lot of your own personal demons and emotions and struggles, which is why I think a lot of other fans have related to As They Lay Dying, and I think that's definitely demonstrated on Born Through Fire. It's obviously very cathartic to sort of confront your own personal struggles with your lyrics, but when you have to almost kind of use that as the fuel behind your fire, can that also maybe make the songwriting process just as deteriorating as well?
It's like I have to find a balance, because in my normal life, it's difficult to be really vulnerable like I am when I'm writing lyrics, right? So it's like I get to walk around, go to the gym, and just kind of enjoy time with my close friends and family, and I don't have to like talk about everything that I've been through because they've been there with me through it all, and just get to really enjoy life, and it's very like peaceful and serene. And then there's times when I sit and reflect by myself while I'm writing music, and I tend to like be mostly inspired by like sad things, but I don't want to leave. I don't want to start a song on a sad note and then leave it there, right? So I tend to always have a storyline that addresses maybe the hardship at first, and then sort of creates an arc to hope at the end. And occasionally, that form that doesn't fit, but like generally speaking, that's how I function as a person, because I like to acknowledge all the struggles that have brought us to where we are, but then have a way of looking at it that's hopeful, because I feel like that's part of how humans have survived this crazy human history that we have, right? It's like we've been through so many terrible things on this planet, but we get through it because there's this little piece of hope in us that knows how to kind of correct the course that we're on.
Yeah, I think there's like for I think one of As I Lay Dying's strongest songs was Parallels, because I think that there's like a triumphant melody behind it, but it almost seems, I feel like, and this could just be my interpretation of it, but when, there is a better way if we just let go. Like letting go is so different. Letting go of certain things is like one of the hardest things in the world, and like POD once said, the hardest part of holding on is letting it go. And I think that that was a good representation that sometimes, no matter how painful things could be, that's unfortunately, in a way, like the best route to take.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is hard. I mean, and that song to me, most specifically, was addressing like materialism, and even maybe a weird theme for a metal song, but even like the way we eat in America, and like just the way we consume, really, and it's like we get so used to that pattern, it becomes like a piece of who we are, and then we have to like let that go, and like that's not our identity.
Well, do you want, this is like a brain picking question, a lyrics about, because do you want everything you write to be more or less like a snapshot of who you are at that particular time? Because I also think that some of your lyrics, like the lyrics to Vacancy or Upside Down Kingdom, I think age like fine wine, especially in 2020. Do you want maybe the art to sort of like grow and evolve with you as you evolve as an artist? Because I've always said art is life, and it can grow and it can develop, and sometimes it can eventually die too.
Yeah, so those two songs, as an example, are I think in some ways I try to write. So some ways, exactly like you said, it's a snapshot of where we were at that moment. Each album for most bands really is, because we're growing and evolving people, and so if you were to a snapshot of where a band was in their 20s versus their 40s, but those songs are great examples of songs where I wrote about not just necessarily where I was at that moment, but also who I want to be and who I strive to be. And so sometimes I think that's where you can listen to a band and you can say, hey, these lyrics, they seem a little bit hypocritical. Like maybe you're listening to an artist who struggles with addiction, and he's writing a song about trying to overcome addiction. It's like, well, he's not writing the song about how he's perfect. He's writing a song about who he wants to be, right? And so to me, those are the songs that really age well. Like you mentioned, is the songs of like not only where my mind is right now, but like where I believe the best path is for me. And sometimes obviously as humans we get off the path. We know where we want to be going, and sometimes we get off that path even though we know what we want to be doing.
But you have like a variety of different methods, because I'd imagine with like Austrian Death Machine, for example, you kind of like in a way portray like a character in a way, or like, and a joke I have like about like, not really a joke, but like like to have like this vacancy will take everything this world can offer, only to make a heavy song saying I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. Like you're able to kind of go all around the spectrum. So depending if it's coming from an internal source or an external source, or just depending on the subject matter in general, does it resonate with you differently, or are you channeling something, kind of like channeling a different energy depending on what the lyrical subject matter is about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of a personality, because I mean, the easiest example is when you're sitting down and you just want to kick your feet up and sit on the couch and watch something on your TV. Sometimes you're like, I feel like a comedy, and sometimes you feel like an action movie or whatever, and you're not always in the same mood. And I feel like for me, Austrian Death Machine is a good example of like, hey, I don't want to take myself too seriously. I want to just write a really heavy song that just, it's like embodying fun, or just a different mindset than I would normally be. And the vulnerability that I take with Born Through Fire and As I Dying, it's great, but it's also emotionally exhausting to write that kind of a song, right? Whereas with Austrian Death Machine, I could sit down, and if I don't finish the lyrics within 30 minutes, I'm on the wrong mindset, because it's like, well, I mean, I should just sit down and just kind of like have fun with this.
Yeah, of course, of course. And but in order to get that inspiration as sort of creative energy for any project that you're in, do you almost kind of like, is inspiration really something that can be sought out in a way? Like, do you almost look for inspiration or have to put yourself in a specific place to cultivate ideas, or does inspiration just strike out of the blue?
Um, I would say that it just comes in waves, because I'll have the hardest time writing anything for 3 months, and then all of a sudden in 3 days I'll write three songs. And I wish that I could, I wish I could answer that question well to say, what brings it all about. But occasionally I'll just be going through life, and it's not even necessarily a song, just something triggers a thought for me, right? And sometimes it's a song that's not that great, that I think like, oh, like I see what they're trying to do. I wish they did this, and then I'll go home and I'll write what I wish that band did, right? and other times it's it's watching a movie, and you see these characters interacting. There wasn't even from the dialogue. It just was a feeling that was portrayed on the screen, and then it's like, man, I could definitely write a song about that, and it comes all over the place in terms of the little bits of inspiration. But I can say that I have this really weird output thing where I don't really write songs for much time, and then when I do, like right now, we just released the Born Through Fire record. I'm really happy with it. We're in the middle of recording an As the Dying record, and while they're editing the As the Dying vocals or taking time to prep sessions or like what it is, it's delaying As the Dying stuff from time to time. I'll sit down and I'll write an Austrian Death Machine song in the in between time, because I just like I'm in the zone, right?
Yeah.
And so I've the musical output I've had in the last few months has been incredible, but the few months before that was like nothing.
It happens. I mean, artist blocks are like are the worst thing ever. And but you also have multiple mediums of expressing yourself as well, because you sing and write lyrics, but you also play guitar, as we've seen with Point of Recognition, and you wrote a lot of the riffs on the Beneath the Encasing and Ashes days and whatnot. So depending on the instrument too, does that almost express a different side of yourself? Can you express a side of yourself with guitar that you couldn't necessarily express on vocals, and vice versa?
Yeah, definitely. There's it's like if you were to do like therapy with a little kid, and you say, okay, this kid doesn't have the vocabulary to talk about hardships necessarily. This kid might not even know what the word trauma means, but this kid can draw or can play little games or like whatever. So that's the basis of taking things that are difficult to express and putting them into an art form or a playroom for a kid or whatever it is. And for me, that's the guitar. It's like I have a frustrating day, and I'll come home and I'll just write like the nastiest riff, and it's like, okay, cool, that was a great outlet. Now I got all that out of my system, right? I didn't have to like analyze it or talk about it. I didn't have the words for it. I created it on a guitar, and that's sometimes where the really heavy, thrashy, riffy songs come from.
Of course. And speaking of thrashy and riffy, I do need to ask this, and I'm pretty sure plenty of your fans are wondering about this, but this year does mark 20 years of Frail Words Collapse, which I've always thought of as I Lay Dying's most experimental album, actually, because Forever or Distance is Darkness, then to have Behind Me Lies Another Fallen Soldier or a track like Song 10, like I feel like it has many different experimental aspects behind it. First and foremost, could fans be expecting an anniversary tour of that album? And just what were some of the memories on that? Because there was, I would say, between that and Shadows of Security, that was a huge evolutionary jump and further demonstrated on an ocean between us and so on.
Yeah. So we actually had this this conversation internally for Phil and I, because those two records were really close to each other. They were within 2 years of Frail Words Collapse and then Shadows of Security. And so we said, well, we probably would be, I mean, some bands do this, no judgment to them, but like we'd probably be milking a little bit if we did a 20th anniversary tour of this record and then did a new record and then immediately 20th anniversary of the next record. We'd be like just so much of As the Dying in the marketplace. And we prioritize it. And this is not because we don't value Frail Words Collapse. For me, I mean, that's actually, I think my career personally was built on that record. That was back in the day when I was writing the vast majority of guitar parts. And so to me, I'm very passionate and close to that, because some of that diversity comes from me learning and expanding on guitar for the first time. I think prior to that record, I wrote primarily dissonant songs, and then I said, oh, let me give some of these melodic ones a run, and I started writing Forever, and even the riffs in 94 Hours are very melodic, and so that was kind of an expansion of my guitar playing at that time. But with that said, to get to the answer, we decided Phil and I wrote Shadows of Security together. It was just the two of us, essentially, just really buckled down, and we spent a few months. And it was our first experience writing a record together, and really him and I at this point are the core of the band. And we decided, it's really going to mean a lot to us personally to go celebrate the 20th anniversary of Shadows of Security, which is pretty crazy to think that's by the time we release this new record we're working on, we'll be right back in the studio, either re-recording some Shadows of Security songs or at least preparing for that 20th anniversary. Because I mean, time starts to fly. Records take forever to put together.
Yeah, I know. And I've just, And it's such a because like I feel like evolution is quite prevalent through the whole As They Lay Dying catalog when you compare the first recordings. Which, by the way, like when I listen to like a track like Beneath the Encasing of Ashes or something like that, I don't know why that guitar tone has been so common with a lot of metalcore debuts. I literally been calling that guitar tone the debut tone because All That Remains had a similar tone on their debut. Shadows Fall had a similar tone on their debut. On Earth kind of had a bit of a similar tone on their debut. So, but you know, you could tell what will be off of Frail Words Collapse, what will be off of Shadows of Security, etc. So, I think it's fair to say that evolution has always just been part of the songwriting process, almost whether subconsciously or intentionally, right?
Yeah, yeah, and part of it is, I didn't learn guitar until my last year in high school. So I guess I was almost 18 or around there. And so for me, I was writing records really shortly after playing, beginning to play guitar. So like I mentioned, for me personally, I never took lessons, right? I just wrote like the bands I was listening to and enjoyed, and just kind of created a certain energy. And then my personal playing got better with Frail Words Collapse, but then you can really see Phil coming in as the first guitar player that really significantly contributed to the songwriting process. It's like, wow, like he's a much better guitar player than Tim. In a good way. It doesn't mean that I can't write or don't write. It just means that I get to write what I write plus everything Phil writes, which is, taking the band to a much more, and we're not a techie kind of band, but I think a lot of, a lot of these techie bands, when they try to cover our songs, realize, well, there's a lot of intricacies here that like I didn't really think about. I mean, especially with the way Phil plays, a lot of tail ends and things like that.
Yeah, not a techie band. I would say that in the realm of metalcore, you probably are the most techie band. Like I remember, and came to that conclusion when I heard Defender because that's when I realized how good soloing sounds in the background behind vocals as much as when it stands out alone. So I think you guys are almost like one of the most technical bands in the metalcore genre.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and it, I would certainly say we're more than capable of it, but that's not the mindset that we take when we write songs. Because I feel like, to me, a good song like survives time, and I love stuff like Dillinger Escape Plan when I was younger. I mean, I still would enjoy that record if it came out today. But to me, the long, just the overall like success of a band to me is in good songwriting, techie or not. It's just like, does that song like move me? Can a person like my wife, as an example, who loves music but is not an instrumentalist, or doesn't play any instrument, can she still connect with it, right? And that to me is super important.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, there's been bands where, like, I didn't start playing an instrument until I was in my teens, but I was into music long before that. And then, I love the song, and then I listened to it from studying music and whatnot, and then you have a different point of view on it, which is kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. You don't want to like hate the song that got you into music in a way, but
Yeah,
it's
there's a balance.
like, was theory ever something that was contributed to As They Lay Down? Because I spoke with Phil in 2020, and I was blown away by just his knowledge of how he writes and all of his terminologies that he was using.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned it over the years. I never took lessons or anything, and of course, when I put together like Austrian Death Machine records as an example, I program all the drums, and so I learn obviously all the timing and what's triplet grid, what's regular. I mean, when I'm changing tempos, and what scale the song is in, so that when I send it to like somebody to play lead guitar, it's like, we're on the same page. And I understand all the technical stuff now. I do my absolute best to think about it as little as possible when it comes to songwriting, because there's this like gut feeling, like this just like core emotion that you have as a human. It's like, oh, does this move me, right? And that has very little to do with music theory. Although when you're done with it, on the aftermath, then you can go and analyze and be like, oh, why did I like that so much? And then that helps, I think, for future songs to be like, oh, I like that so much because this key change that happened, or whatever it was that happens. You can understand it after the fact and then apply it to future songs. But in the middle of the creating process, to me, it's like I try to turn that part of my brain off the best that I
Yeah,
can.
because in the end, this is rock and roll, so there has to be rule breaking incorporated in there one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it. Instinct has to really drive it, for it to have like an aggressive sound. And my voice doesn't really match music that if the aggression meter is like below a certain point, then I feel weird singing over it, right? So I got to keep that up pretty high.
Well, speaking of instinct, though, because sometimes you are working on a song for days, weeks, months. I've heard you mention like how you were working on the songs for Shadows of Security for a while, then you had to go right into the vocals in a way, which I think I don't care what you say. I think the vocals on that album are really, really good. So I'll just say that right now.
I
But
appreciate that. It's my least favorite. I always wish I could redo it, but I know it's important. It at that time, our genre was developing, and so I feel like it was passable, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. But if you work on a song for a long period of time, though, does it make it harder to sort of like capture that moment or like maintain the idea or maintain the emotion that initially sparked it in a way? Like, don't you like to want to keep the feeling as consistent as possible through the making of each song?
Well, luckily there's fresh ears that get involved. Like an engineer or you know, a good example is Jordan wouldn't be involved in the writing of the song because Phil and I would program it, and then when we're done, we'd say, hey, what do you think of this, right? And it's like, well, he's hearing the song for the first time. He's like, I think the song's great. I would just maybe change this transition or this drum fill or whatever it may be. And so like that fresh set of ears um, reminds us of like, hey, here's where you're connecting and not connecting, right? And that's one of the cool things about Phil and I hunkering down and like we're so involved, but then we have these incredible people around us. Like right now, Nick Pierce just finished tracking drums for the As a Dying record a couple weeks ago, and it gave it kind of like a second life because, or even to bring it back to Born Through Fire, when Luke Holland came and did those few songs with Joey and I, it's pretty crazy to think that overall the drum beats, like in terms of the snare count, if it was a double time, like he kept that, or if it was a half time, he kept that. But all the little intricacies, I mean, really brought so much more energy to the song, and so we're just thankful to have in both situations, whether it's Phil and I or Joey and I, to have these other sets of fresh ears come in and just put the little bells and whistles on there that like bring the energy to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, like, I've always like, you don't want to rush a song, but you also don't want to work on it for too long. I feel like there's a threshold that like you want to make sure you put out something quality, but like I always feel like the longer you work on something, it's almost kind of like overcooking something too, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've made things sterile before, and then actually, oddly enough, gone back and said, hey, the demo had more energy. There's something about it. Main playing wasn't as tight, but it just feels better, right? And um, Phil's so capable as a musician, not only like on stage, but in the studio, that it is a possibility from time to time that he'll make things too sterile. And I've learned from that. And so then when Joey and I were working on stuff, you know, I said, hey, dude, I know that you could. Joey's also an incredible guitar player. I said, dude, I know that you could track this ever so slightly tighter, but don't, because it's gonna take away some of the raw energy, right? And it's cool to have all these years of experience.
Yep, definitely. And I have two more questions for you. When it comes to playing live, though, is there at all a similar energy that you're channeling into your live presence as you do when you songwrite? Because I'd imagine, touring, you feel different days on different shows of the tour, so you may not be feeling the same way when you first wrote the song. So is there at all a similar energy that ties it together, or are they two completely separate arts altogether?
Uh, yeah, that's hard because there's like I don't, not to be too nerdy with philosophy, but like there's like old philosophers like Plato that believed that we see a table in real life, but then like up in the clouds of whatever Plato's version of heaven was, there was like the perfect table that was up there somewhere, like floating around of like what a table's supposed to be. Uh, and that was obviously very early days of like almost archaic human philosophy, but like to me, there's the recorded version and then the live version, and then the version that like is the best perfect representation of the emotion and everything. And neither the live version nor the recorded version really can capture that, because the recorded version is always going to be more accurate and perfect and on time and everything, but it's always going to be ever so slightly different emotion than like what's played live. And then the live version is always going to be ever so slightly sloppier, because not because the musicians I'm playing with aren't tight or anything, but that's just the nature of live music, right? It's like we're it's kind of like a triangle. We're all aiming for this. The recording and the live music are all aiming for like this, I don't know, this like fully realized version of the song, if that makes sense.
It does, but here's like the sort of trick question, because in the end you are just taking the song that you recorded and you're just replicating it in a live setting. So is there anything remotely creative about playing live?
Well, I mean, a lot of modern bands do this much more than me, so they've got a lot more problems to deal with. But I typically like single track most of my vocals, and then we'll do like an overlap from here and there. But a lot of these modern bands will do like 5 layers of vocals stacked, a high, low, a mid, and then the next line is like another 5 layers. It's like, well, in that case, they just have to choose, like, because they can't replicate all of it live, right? And in my case, I mean, I have less of that issue compared to like maybe modern metalcore, but I still have that choice of like, um, I mean, I only have so much air I can breathe and so much stamina. Like, what am I going to put the biggest emphasis on? And to me, it's about like impact. You know what I mean? Because if I'm a little bit out of breath, but I'm running around stage and interacting with the crowd, I would rather that than me, be perfectly hold out every word the right perfect length, but be standing in one spot the whole show.
Well, As I Lay Dying in particular, and definitely also with Born Through Fire, there's also like a visual aspect behind it too. Like I can't picture an As I Lay Dying album up until 2019, obviously without a skull on it in a way. Like there's this sort of skull nature behind it there, and with the music video for The Sound of Truth really being inspired by 1984 and whatnot. Like it almost seems like there is a visual entity that's behind your music as well. Like, are you almost like seeing visions as you're playing live or as you're songwriting on getting sort of like a sense or moving all 5 of your senses in a way?
Um, yeah, I'm for whatever reason not the most visual of artists. My wife paints and she like creates these things out of nowhere, and I'm like, how was that in your head, right? And for me, there's probably good and bad that goes with it, but um I think in like broader concepts visually, but I don't have this like really vivid thing going on there. So for me, it's like the emotional connection and energy. I can tell like I'm all, maybe I'm like a little sensitive or something, but like if somebody walks into a room and I can tell like what mood they're in, right? And I can tell what mood the crowd's in, right? And so to me, I'm like mostly moving off of that and most in tune with that in a live setting.
Definitely. And the final question I wanted to ask you is and I spoke with Phil about this and everybody in the genre. What is metalcore in your eyes? Because I ask people like fans what metalcore is, and 9 times out of 10 they say it's music that has singing and screaming in it. But I would never call Fear Factory a metalcore band, or Soilwork, or In Flames metalcore. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
what is a metalcore band in a way? In as a metalcore frontman yourself, maybe you're a credible source.
Yeah, that's actually a great question because those are excellent examples. I mean, Fear Factory has that like industrial crossover kind of mechanical vibe, but they do have singing and screaming and tons of riffs, and so does Soulwork or In Flames, and so um, man, I think metalcore generally speaking to me is more rhythmically oriented, but not to the degree of Fear Factory, if that makes sense. Like, and so there's like kind of like an exception to every rule. It's like, well, metalcore is a lot more rhythmically oriented compared to Soilwork or Flames, but it's actually technically less rhythmically oriented compared to Fear Factory. So it's like somewhere in
Yeah.
there. I have no idea how to like quantify what is metalcore and what isn't.
Yeah.
I hate to not answer your question, but you bring up like really great points. It's
Well,
the
metal
subconscious human experience.
Well, metalcore in itself has become such a diverse genre too. Like I see a lot of differences between you guys and All That Remains. I see a lot of difference between you guys and Asking Alexandria, and then with new bands really bringing life to it, like Wage War or Beartooth or Dragged Under. It almost seems like that there's always reinventions behind it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I grew up, like there were bands like All Out War and stuff that, um, to me, they're clarified as like, oh, we're metallic hardcore, and it's like, okay, like that's also something that's like creates a gray area because it's like, okay, well, uh, I mean, there's a lot of metal riffs there. There's a lot of like Slayer type influences, but they're definitely have this hardcore background, and so then you have metalcore versus like metallic hardcore, and when I grew up. The genre didn't really exist like it did. Like for instance, in the hardcore scene, Hatebreed was considered like too metal to be like a true hardcore band. But by today's standard, there's really nothing more definitively hardcore than Hatebreed, right? You
Yeah.
know, so I mean, things just change over time. So I like Wage War being an example of a very modern twist on metalcore that I think is great personally. But somebody who grew up listening to like Converge and thought that was like the early roots of metalcore might be like, these, how are these bands in the same genre? It makes no sense,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. When I was in high school, the big trend was just saying a word and adding core at the end of it, and then and it was a new genre. And you would go on Wikipedia to reading about the genre, and there's only like two bands in the whole thing, and like they lasted less than a year. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I've become increasingly less interested in titles over the year. I think that some As the Dying songs, if you listen to them, are just metal songs. Like, you know, like we would put some of our songs up with somebody who's considered you know, like Amon Amarth, right, is like considered just, they're not metalcore at all. They're just like a Viking metal type thing, right? But if you took the Viking theme out of it, I don't know what you'd call it, like melodic death metal maybe.
no,
And
that's
so
what they would be
there's,
called. Um,
yeah, so then there's As the songs that are very clearly like melodic death metal, and then there's other songs of ours that you know, pull on the emotional side, that's like you know, like a really old song, like you mentioned earlier, like Behind Me Lies Another Fallen Soldier. It's like, well, that's almost, there's no singing in it song whatsoever, but it almost like, I don't know, I hate to use this word, but it almost kind of goes into the emotional territory that like some of the screamo-y kind of bands would do, but like way less sass and way less like, you know, just it's like if that genre was like made by men instead of boys, you know what I mean? Like, I guess, you know what I mean?
well, I've noticed a pattern with As I Lay Dying is any song that would be considered a ballad by tempo standards. So Behind Me Lies Another Fallen Soldier, Song 10. I guess I Never Wanted contradicts this, but like your ballad-driven songs are technically like very not driven by clean vocals at all.
Yeah, and that was a conscious decision specifically because um we were, as a young band in particular, uh screamo as a genre was growing while metalcore was growing, and there was nothing that made me feel weird compared to being called a screamo band, where it's like, well, dude, like, listen to that genre and then listen to our band. Like, we're not, it doesn't fit us, but at the same time, yeah, we do have singing sometimes. So I don't know, it was a really weird in the formation of those two genres. It was like, I kind of want to steer away from that as much as possible, because that's not the identity I see myself as. I have no problem with that genre. I mean, some people love it, and that's totally fine. And but in terms of my personal vision for what I wanted As the Dying to be, it was a little bit more masculine and less sassy than that, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. But I've noticed now with a lot of genres that have gotten like kind of the flack or made fun of, like it happened with metalcore, it happened with new metal, it happened with emo. Now they're being celebrated and having like a legacy of their own in a way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think in the end, all those genres that made fun of we all made fun of came out on top.
Yeah, and I like I think, as an example, somebody could easily make fun of As the Dying and be like, oh, like, why is everything sound so intense and aggressive? Is like, what's like with the hyper masculine thing? Like, why can't they just, you know, chill for a second, right? You know what I mean? And somebody, you know, comes from like the more emo screamo side of things, you know, gets their criticism. So my criticisms are mostly just in terms of what my own vision is, just what I want As the Dying to be, not saying there's any problems with these other genres. Just like, I want to follow this path because I think my voice fits this sound. And that's really like when you hear my voice isolated and then you hear the As the Dying instrumentals, like, oh, these two fit together for some reason, right? You know what I mean?
They
So
do. But the whole like masculine like growling thing, I mean, did they listen to the outro to Distance is Darkness? And I'm not like saying that like it's a bad thing, but that's like the highest pitch melodic singing I've ever heard in a metalcore song ever.
yeah, yeah. And to us that was like you know, we like Deftones is a perfect example to me of a band that's extremely melodic. Like I mean, they choose melodies that nobody else would really ever choose and explore all these different territories. And Chino's doing all this like bizarre falsetto stuff, but somehow in some way it still feels like a group of men playing the songs, if that makes sense. You know what I
Definitely.
mean?
I totally feel you
And
on
so
that.
I think that's like the kind of vibe that we're going for. There's nothing wrong with younger guys coming. Some guys just come out and they're still young, and they're like 18, 20 years old, and they look like boys still. And so it's not, you know, with us when we were making Frail Words Collapse as an example, we looked really young. We looked like kids, You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
I don't want to like people. I don't want people to look at us like we're on the same record label as Cannibal Corpse, right? People look at Cannibal Corpse and they look at us and they're like, oh, these guys, they're not heavy. It's like, well, if you just close your eyes and don't think about like what we look like, there's some parts that are equally as heavy at times as like Cannibal Corpse might be, right? Just obviously with a different, metalcore like rhythmic twist to it, right? And so that was like the kind of like insecurities that would bug in my ears at the time. Is like, okay, we look like kids. How do we get away from this like this genre of kids? You know what I mean?
and the answer was to open with 94 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for such a very intriguing conversation. Is there just anything else with Born Through Fire? This is a great album that you would like to promote, as well as what we could be expecting on the new As I Lay Dying album. Now that we got members from Unearth and Miss May I incorporated in there, what else would you like to plug? Feel free to promote anything. This will be uploaded by midnight, so any tours scheduled for 2028, don't promote them here.
All right. So I would say with the Born Through Fire record, we're so early in the record release that Joey and I are trying to figure out what to pay attention to with guitar playthroughs or anything like that. And so a lot of bands when they have their second or third record, they can figure out like, oh, this is the single that our fans want to hear. It's like, well, right now we have this record out and we're trying to see what people gravitate towards. I'm really curious to hear people's input on that. And then with Dazzle Dying, I mentioned we're in the studio, and so unfortunately in modern times that doesn't mean the record's coming out very soon, but it's in the works. So everybody who's curious, I mentioned that we're working with Ryan Neff. Ken Susie's doing some solos. Nick Pierce already tracked the drums. So to answer some of those questions about who are those guys contributing in any way, obviously they are. We just haven't really kind of like had a final product to deliver yet.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing what that final product would be. We're very curious. But thank you so much, Tim. Everybody, Tim with Born Through Fire, as well as I Lay Dying and Austrian Death Machine. Be sure to check out the brand new Born Through Fire album, Purity and Refine. This is or Purify and Refine. My apologies. We are here. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.